Abandoned and betrayed by her powerful in-laws after her husband's suspicious death, Sarah Blackwood clutches her infant daughter as they face certain death in Wyoming's merciless winter. Blood freezing in her veins, she collapses in the snow until a lone Apache warrior discovers their nearly lifeless bodies. Her salvation brings new danger as the Blackwoods return to claim their granddaughter and silence the truth forever. Before we start the video, comment where you are tuning in from. Sarah Blackwood pressed a damp cloth to her husband's fevered brow, her fingers trembling with exhaustion. The dim light of their small cabin did little to hide the pallor of Jacob's face as he tossed restlessly beneath the quilts. "More water," he rasped, eyes fluttering open. "Please, Sarah," she nodded, moving to fetch the cup from beside the hearth. 3 days had passed since the men from the main house had brought Jacob home, his side torn open by what his father called a hunting accident. A strange accident indeed, Sarah thought, that left a perfectly round hole like that of a rifle shot. "They'll come," Jacob whispered as she helped him drink. "The papers, you must find the papers." "Shh," Sarah soothed, glancing worriedly at the cradle where their 5-month-old daughter Grace slept peacefully. "Save your strength." His fingers suddenly gripped her wrist with surprising force. "Listen to me, the contracts, what they did to those people." His eyes, bright with fever, locked onto hers. "My father and Ezra, they're not what you think." Before she could question him further, Jacob's body convulsed with coughing. Sarah held him as blood speckled his lips. When the fit subsided, he fell into a restless sleep. By morning he was gone. Sarah sat motionless beside the bed, her husband's hand still clutched in hers when the cabin door swung open. Maxwell Blackwood's imposing figure filled the doorway, his son Ezra at his shoulder. Neither removed their hats as they stepped inside. "He's passed then," Maxwell stated flatly, glancing at Jacob's still form. No grief softened his weathered face. Sarah nodded, unable to form words through her grief. "Shame," Ezra muttered, though his eyes darted around the cabin with peculiar intensity. "Hunting accidents, terrible business." "I'll make arrangements for the burial," Maxwell announced. Ezra helped the widow gather Jacob's things. Sarah watched in stunned silence as Ezra began rifling through the trunk at the foot of their bed, then through the small desk where Jacob kept his papers. "What are you looking for?" she asked, finding her voice at last. "Just seeing if my brother left anything important," Ezra replied without meeting her eyes. "Business matters you wouldn't understand." The funeral 3 days later was a brief affair. The Blackwoods were the wealthiest cattle ranchers in the territory, yet barely a dozen people gathered in the bitter November wind as Jacob was lowered into the frozen ground. Sarah stood apart from her in-laws, clutching Grace to her chest, noticing how Maxwell and Ezra spoke in hushed tones with two men in army uniforms who departed quickly after offering cursory condolences. On the third morning after the funeral, Sarah was preparing breakfast when Maxwell appeared at her door again, this time with Ezra and the ranch foreman. "Mrs. Blackwood," Maxwell began formally, "I've come to discuss your situation." Sarah gestured to the rough-hewn table, but none of the men sat. "Your presence here was tolerated because of my son," Maxwell continued. "That arrangement has concluded with his passing." Sarah stared at him, uncomprehending. "This is my home, Jacob's home." Maxwell's laugh held no humor. "This cabin, like everything for 20 miles, belongs to Blackwood Ranch. You have until sundown to pack your belongings and leave." "You can't do this," Sarah protested, anger cutting through her grief. "I am Jacob's wife. Grace is your granddaughter." Ezra stepped forward, sneering. "You were never family, just breeding stock for the Blackwood line." He looked at the baby with cold calculation. "The child could stay and be raised properly. You, however, have outlived your usefulness." Sarah's arms tightened protectively around Grace. "I won't leave my daughter." "Then take her," Maxwell snapped. "But you'll leave this property by nightfall. 1 horse, 1 bag. Anything more is stealing from the Blackwoods." After they left, Sarah moved in a daze, packing what little she could carry, warm clothes for her and Grace, the few silver coins she'd hidden away, food that would keep. As she worked, Jacob's delirious words about papers and contracts echoed in her mind. She pulled back the mattress, searched the floorboards, found nothing. The foreman arrived as the winter sun touched the western mountains. He said nothing as he watched her mount the old mare, Grace securely bundled against her chest. His eyes held something like pity as he handed her the reins. "Head south toward town," he advised quietly. "Stay on the road, storm's coming." Sarah rode until they reached the edge of Blackwood property, marked by a cattle gate stretching across the road. Beyond lay 10 miles of open country before the next homestead. Above, dark clouds gathered against the fading light. The first snowflakes began to fall as the mare picked its way forward. By nightfall, the storm had intensified. Wind howled across the empty landscape, driving snow into blinding sheets. Sarah's hands grew numb on the reins as she hunched over Grace, using her body as a shield against the elements. When she spotted the abandoned trapper's Linta just off the trail, Sarah nearly wept with relief. She managed to get Grace inside and the horse tethered in the meager shelter of a windbreak before the worst of the blizzard hit. For 2 days they huddled in the crude shelter. Sarah rationed the food carefully, but by the second evening her milk had begun to dry up from cold and hunger. Grace's cries grew weaker, more pitiful. On the third morning, the storm seemed to ease. Sarah peered outside to find the world transformed into a vast white emptiness. The mare stood motionless, head hanging. Sarah knew with desperate certainty they could not stay another night. With Grace secured against her chest, Sarah mounted and urged the exhausted horse forward. The wind picked up again as they traveled, erasing the road beneath fresh drifts. By midday, Sarah could no longer feel her feet or fingers. The mare stumbled repeatedly. When the horse finally collapsed, Sarah continued on foot, each step a battle against the rising snow and her fading strength. Grace had fallen ominously silent within her wrappings. As the early winter darkness closed in, Sarah's legs finally gave way. She fell to her knees, then forward into the snow. With her last conscious thought, she curled her body around her daughter, using the last of her warmth as shelter against the killing cold. Two hawks moved like a shadow through the blinding whiteness, lean and purposeful despite the brutal conditions. The Apache tracker had learned long ago that winter's worst fury often drove desperate game into the open. His people would have called it foolish to hunt in such weather, but Two Hawks no longer answered to tribal wisdom. 4 winters had passed since he'd left both the army scouts and his tribe behind, choosing solitude over a world that had no place for a man caught between nations. He paused, snow crusting his fur-lined hood as he studied faint impressions nearly obscured by fresh powder. Elk had passed this way not long before. He adjusted his course, moving downslope toward a stand of sheltering pines. The sound reached him first, so faint he initially dismissed it as wind. Two hawks stilled, every sense alert. There it came again, a high, thin wail unlike any animal he knew. A child's cry, his jaw tightened as he changed direction, tracking the sound with growing unease. White settlers rarely ventured this deep into the mountains, especially in winter. The crying grew fainter as he approached, then stopped altogether. Two hawks quickened his pace. He found them half buried in snow at the bottom of a shallow ravine, a woman curled protectively around a bundle pressed to her chest. For a moment he considered turning away. White problems belonged to white people. But when the bundle stirred weakly, instinct overrode caution. Two hawks knelt beside them, brushing snow from the woman's face. Her skin held the blue-white pallor of deep cold, but shallow breath still fogged the frigid air. He unwrapped the layers shielding the infant and found the child alive, though barely. Decision made, he constructed a simple travois from pine branches and leather straps, securing mother and child before beginning the arduous journey back to his cabin. Night had fallen by the time Two Hawks pushed through the door of his isolated dwelling, the woman and child still unresponsive. He worked methodically, stoking the fire to blazing, then stripping the frozen clothes from both figures. The woman's fingertips and toes showed early frostbite, but nothing that couldn't heal. The baby, protected by her mother's body, had fared better. Two hawks wrapped them in fur blankets and positioned them near the hearth. He prepared willow bark tea, supporting the woman's head as he forced small sips between her blue lips. The infant proved more difficult. Two hawks had never handled a child so young, much less attempted to feed one. After several failed attempts with a moistened cloth, he warmed elk milk over the fire and dipped his smallest finger into it, letting the baby suckle droplets until she settled into exhausted sleep. Morning light filtered through the cabin's single window when Sarah jolted awake, disoriented and panicked. Her gaze darted wildly before fixating on the dark-skinned man sitting motionless across the room. She clutched at her chest, finding nothing. "My baby," she rasped, struggling to rise despite her weakness. "Where is my baby?" Two hawks nodded toward a small bundle nestled in furs beside the fire. "The child lives," he said, his English precise but accented. "As do you, though barely." Sarah collapsed back onto the pallet, relief washing over her face as she spotted Grace's sleeping form. Relief gave way to wariness as she studied her unlikely rescuer, taking in his Apache features and the curious blend of native and white man's clothing he wore. "You saved us," she said finally. Two Hawks offered no response, rising to stir something in a pot suspended over the fire. The aroma of meat and herbs filled the small space. "I am Sarah Blackwood," she ventured. "My daughter is Grace." "Names matter little here," Two Hawks replied, ladling broth into a wooden bowl. "When you are strong enough to travel, you will leave. Until then, eat." Sarah accepted the bowl with trembling hands, surprised by the rich flavor of the simple stew. As she ate, she watched Two Hawks move about the cabin with economic precision. Though sparsely furnished, the dwelling was immaculately kept, with neatly stored provisions and carefully arranged tools. "You were an army scout," she observed, nodding the cavalry-issue knife at his belt. Two Hawks paused, dark eyes narrowing. "Once that life is finished, and your people also finished." His tone left no opening for further questions. 3 days passed in uneasy coexistence. Sarah regained strength slowly, spending most of her time tending to Grace, who had developed a rattling cough from their ordeal. Two Hawks maintained his distance, disappearing for hours to hunt or check his trap lines, returning with meat or pelts that he prepared in silence. On the fourth night, Grace's cough worsened suddenly. The baby's tiny body burned with fever as she gasped for breath. Sarah paced the small cabin, singing softly, trying every remedy her mother had taught her, all to no avail. Two Hawks watched from the shadows until Grace's labored breathing became too weak to ignore. Wordlessly, he gathered herbs from leather pouches, crushing them between stones before adding hot water. The pungent steam filled the cabin as he gestured for Sarah to bring the child closer. "Hold her over this," he instructed. "The steam will ease her lungs." Sarah obeyed, desperate enough to try anything. To her amazement, Grace's breathing gradually improved as the herbal steam worked its magic. By dawn, the fever had broken. "How did you know what to do?" Sarah asked, exhaustion evident in her voice. "My mother was a healer," Two Hawks answered simply, the first personal detail he had shared. As Grace recovered, the dynamic between the unlikely housemates shifted. Two Hawks began teaching Sarah survival skills, showing her how to identify edible plants preserved beneath the snow, how to set snares for small game, how to read weather in the clouds. In return, Sarah helped improve the sparse comforts of his cabin, fashioning a proper cradle for Grace from a hollowed log and mending Two Hawks' worn clothing. One evening, as they sat before the fire, Sarah finally broached the subject they had both avoided. "The Blackwoods," she began cautiously. "My husband's family, they cast us out after he died." Two Hawks regarded her steadily, waiting. "Jacob, my husband, was trying to tell me something before he died. About contracts, about what they did to those people. I think he was murdered." "The winter deepens," Two Hawks replied, seemingly changing the subject. "The passes will remain closed for many weeks. Your enemies cannot reach you here, and when spring comes, then you must decide your path." Two Hawks stared into the flames. "The white world has little mercy for women alone, less for those who associate with savages." "You're no savage," Sarah said quietly. "You've shown more humanity than those who claim civilization." Two Hawks' expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his dark eyes. For the first time, he looked directly at Grace, who had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms. "Children should know their true names," he said finally. "Mine is Nashoba. It means wolf in my mother's tongue." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile since her arrival. "It suits you, Nashoba." That night, as a fresh storm raged outside, something fragile and unnamed began to take root in the isolated cabin, as tenacious as the first spring growth beneath winter's snow. By February, the cabin that had once felt cramped now seemed almost like home. Grace had grown stronger despite the harsh conditions, her laughter a bright counterpoint to the howling winter winds. She reached eagerly for Nashoba whenever he entered, her tiny fingers grasping at his long hair with surprising strength. "She thinks you belong to her," Sarah commented one evening as Grace dozed in Nashoba's reluctant arms. The Apache's stoic demeanor had gradually softened around the child, though he maintained careful distance from Sarah herself. "Children know nothing of boundaries," he replied, gently transferring the sleeping infant to her makeshift cradle. "They have not yet learned to fear what is different." Sarah watched him move away, the firelight casting his profile in sharp relief. Is that why you left your people? Because they feared what was different, Nashoba stood motionless, staring into the flames. For a moment, Sarah thought he would retreat into silence, as he often did when she probed too deeply. I guided army scouts for 3 winters, he said finally. I believe the white man's promises of peace if we help them find those who raided their settlements. His voice hardened. But they did not distinguish between guilty and innocent. I led them to camps where there were only old ones, women, children. They killed them all. Sarah's hand covered her mouth. And your own people called me traitor. Those who collaborate cannot return. His eyes met hers. The Blackwoods, they supplied rifles to the army, weapons that failed when my brother's hunting party was attacked by Comanche. 6 died because the firing pins broke. Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. The contracts Jacob mentioned, defective weapons, Nashoba nodded. Many suppliers cheat the army cheats the tribes, death follows the money. A sudden cry from Grace interrupted their conversation. The infant's face contorted with discomfort as fever flushed her cheeks once more. By midnight, her condition had deteriorated alarmingly, her tiny body burning with heat even as she shivered violently. Sarah paced the cabin, singing every lullaby she knew, while Nashoba prepared poultices from his dwindling supply of medicinal herbs. Nothing seemed to help. As dawn approached, Grace's breathing grew labored, each intake a struggle that twisted Sarah's heart. We must break the fever, Nashoba said urgently. The snow water from the North Spring, it is colder than any other. Together they wrapped Grace in furs and ventured into the pre-dawn darkness. The spring bubbled from rock a quarter-mile from the cabin, its waters so cold they burned the skin. Working quickly, they dampened cloths and pressed them to Grace's feverish body. The baby screamed in protest, her cries echoing across the silent forest. Sarah fought her own tears as she held her daughter, murmuring reassurances that felt hollow even to her own ears. Nashoba knelt beside them, his usual composure replaced by genuine fear as he continuously replaced the cold compresses. As the sun crested the eastern ridge, Grace's fever finally broke. The infant fell into an exhausted sleep, her breathing gradually steadying. Sarah sagged against Nashoba, her own strength depleted by the night's ordeal. Without thinking, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, steadying her. Neither moved for several heartbeats. Sarah became acutely aware of his warmth, the solid presence of him against her side. When she finally looked up, their faces were inches apart. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Nashoba's dark eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them. His hand moved hesitantly to her face, fingertips barely grazing her cheek before he pulled away abruptly, rising to his feet. "We should return," he said, voice rough. "The child needs proper rest." That evening, as Grace slept peacefully in her cradle, Sarah discovered a loose seam in the bag she'd hastily packed the day of her expulsion. Investigating further, she found a slim leather journal wedged within the lining, its presence deliberately concealed. Jacob's handwriting filled the pages, documenting months of suspicious business dealings. The Blackwoods had been supplying the army with rifles manufactured with inferior metals, while simultaneously selling ammunition with reduced powder to several tribes. Both transactions yielded enormous profits while virtually guaranteeing weapons failures in the field. Jacob was gathering evidence, Sarah told Nashoba, spreading the journal pages before him. He was going to report them to the federal authorities. Nashoba studied the neat columns of figures, his expression darkening. "These are the same weapons, the ones that failed my people." He looked up sharply. "Your husband's hunting accident was no accident at all," Sarah finished. "Maxwell and Ezra killed their own son to protect their business." The knowledge settled between them, weighty and dangerous. Outside, the February storm raged against the cabin walls, but inside, a different kind of tempest was brewing. Spring arrived suddenly in the high country, the snow retreating with astonishing speed once the thaw began. Wildflowers erupted across meadows that had been buried only days before, and birds returned to fill the air with mating calls. With the changing season came the reality both had avoided acknowledging. Sarah could not remain in Nashoba's cabin indefinitely. The world beyond the mountains would soon be accessible again, along with its threats and obligations. "I could go to California," Sarah suggested one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset. Grace crawled happily at their feet, investigating a colorful beetle with solemn concentration. No one would find us there. Nashoba's silence spoke volumes. His people were here even if he lived apart from them. The mountains were his home in a way Sarah was only beginning to understand. You could come with us, she ventured, voice barely audible above the spring peepers beginning their twilight chorus. Before he could respond, a distant sound caught his attention. Nashoba rose, body instantly alert as he scanned the valley below. "What is it?" Sarah asked, gathering Grace protectively against her chest. "Horses, at least 3, maybe more." His expression grew grim. No one hunts this valley in spring. The implications hung in the air between them. Someone was tracking them, and there were few possibilities as to who it might be. That night as Grace slept, the barriers between Sarah and Nashoba finally crumbled. His lips found hers in the firelight, tentative at first, then with growing hunger. Years of isolation and her months of grief dissolved in the heat of their embrace. They came together on the bearskin rug before the hearth, their joining both desperate and tender, a defiance against the world that would keep them apart. Afterward, Sarah laid her head on Nashoba's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "What happens now?" she murmured. "Now we prepare," he replied, fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "The Blackwoods will not stop until they have what they want." "The journal," Sarah said, "and the child, your daughter, is heir to the Blackwood fortune." His arms tightened around her. "They will not risk having her raised by a woman who knows their crimes." Sarah raised herself on one elbow, studying his face in the dying firelight. "Then we fight." Nashoba's smile held no humor. "We survive. That is what my people do, what your people have never learned." 3 days later, their borrowed peace shattered completely. Nashoba returned from hunting to find Sarah pale and frightened. "A man came to the ridge above the valley," she told him. "He had a spyglass. I don't think he saw me, but he was watching the cabin." Nashoba's expression hardened. "The snow has melted from the north trail. They will come within days." He began gathering weapons, checking his rifle and knife. "You must take Grace and head west toward the Flathead territory. I have friends there who will help you reach the coast. And you? I will make sure they do not follow." Sarah gripped his arm. "I won't leave you to face them alone." The look Nashoba gave her was both tender and resolute. "Some battles cannot be won together." He pressed his hand to her cheek. "Trust that I will find you." That night, as they prepared for separation, Sarah removed a page from Jacob's journal, one documenting the most damning evidence against the Blackwoods. She folded it carefully, securing it inside her clothing. "Insurance," she explained to Nashoba's questioning look. "In case words are not enough to protect us." Dawn had barely broken when Nashoba led Sarah and Grace to the hidden tunnel behind the cabin, originally dug as a winter food storage but expanded as an escape route. He pressed his knife into Sarah's hand, keeping only his rifle for himself. "Follow the stream west for 2 miles, then climb to the ridge," he instructed. "Keep the morning sun at your back until midday, then find shelter. Travel only at first light thereafter." Sarah clutched Grace tightly, fighting back tears. "Promise me you'll come." Instead of answering, Nashoba pulled her close, kissing her with fierce intensity. Then he stepped back, features settling into the impassive mask he'd worn when they first met. "Go now, do not look back." Sarah crawled through the narrow tunnel, emerging in a dense thicket 100 yards behind the cabin. She oriented herself toward the stream, heart pounding with every snap of twig beneath her feet. Grace, sensing her mother's tension, remained unusually quiet. They had traveled perhaps a mile when the distant crack of rifle fire froze Sarah in her tracks. One shot, then 2 more in rapid succession. The sound echoed across the valley, sending birds scattering from the trees. Sarah fought the desperate urge to turn back. "Trust him," she told herself. "Keep moving." By midday, Sarah reached the western ridge as instructed, finding shelter in a shallow cave. Grace fussed hungrily, and Sarah nursed her while straining to hear any pursuit. The afternoon stretched into evening with no sign of either Nashoba or the Blackwoods. Sarah dozed fitfully, jolting awake at every sound. She resumed traveling at first light, following game trails westward. By noon, exhaustion and worry had taken their toll. When she spotted a creek with clear water, Sarah stopped to rest and refill her water skin. The sound of approaching horses reached her moments too late. Before she could hide, Ezra Blackwood and 2 unfamiliar men emerged from the trees, rifles trained on her. "Well, well," Ezra drawled, satisfaction evident in his cruel smile. "The grieving widow survives after all, with my niece no less." Sarah backed away slowly, placing herself between the men and the creek. "What happened to your savage friend?" Ezra continued, dismounting. "He put up quite a fight, managed to wound Jenkins before taking a bullet. Cold dread filled Sarah's chest. You're lying, am I? Ezra advanced toward her. No one's coming to save you this time. Hand over the child and the journal, and perhaps I'll be merciful. Sarah's fingers closed around Nashoba's knife, still sheathed at her waist. If you touch my daughter, I will kill you, Ezra laughed. Brave words from a woman alone. He gestured to his companions. Take the baby. Alive, the woman is expendable. As the men dismounted, Sarah made her decision. In one fluid motion, she unsheathed the knife and pressed the blade against her own throat. One step closer and neither of us will live to tell this tale. The men hesitated and Ezra's smile faltered. You wouldn't I? What else do I have to lose? Sarah's voice was surprisingly steady. My husband is dead. The man I love may be dead. What kind of life awaits my daughter under your roof? Ezra's face contorted with rage. The journal, where is it? Safe, beyond your reach. Sarah took a careful step backward. The truth about the weapons contracts, about Jacob's murder, all of it preserved for the authorities. You stupid woman, Ezra spat. Do you think anyone would believe you over the Blackwoods? We own half the territory. Perhaps not me, Sarah conceded. But they'll believe Jacob's own testimony, written in his hand, witnessed by a federal judge 3 days before his death. The lie hit its mark. Uncertainty flickered across Ezra's face. Now you'll turn around and leave us be, Sarah continued, desperation lending her courage. Or I swear by all that's holy, the entire territory will know what the Blackwoods have done. For a moment it seemed to work. Ezra signaled his men to hold position while he considered his options. Then his expression hardened. Kill her, take the child. Everything happened at once. As Ezra's man raised his rifle, an arrow hissed through the air, striking him in the shoulder. A second arrow followed, embedding itself in a tree inches from Ezra's head. The horses reared in panic as shots rang out from the surrounding forest. Apache, one of the men shouted, scrambling for cover. In the chaos, Sarah clutched Grace and dove behind a fallen log. Through gaps in the wood, she watched as Nashoba emerged from the trees, rifle in hand, blood staining his left side. 3 Apache warriors flanked him, arrows nocked and ready. Ezra fired wildly, missing Nashoba by inches. Before he could chamber another round, Nashoba was upon him, driving him to the ground. The other Blackwood men fled to the horses, abandoning their employer. Sarah ran toward the struggling men, reaching them as Nashoba pinned Ezra beneath him. Nashoba's face was a mask of cold fury as he pressed his knife to Ezra's throat. For my brother, he growled. For Jacob Blackwood. For every life taken by your greed. Nashoba, wait, Sarah called. Not like this. Nashoba's hand trembled with the effort of restraint. He would have killed you, taken the child. And he will pay for that, Sarah said firmly. But not by your hand, not when we can see justice done properly. Nashoba hesitated, then nodded grimly. The Apache warriors bound Ezra securely while Nashoba embraced Sarah, his relief palpable as he touched Grace's cheek with gentle fingers. I thought I'd lost you, Sarah whispered, nodding the hastily bandaged wound on his side. I told you I would come, he replied simply. One of the warriors approached, speaking rapidly in Apache. Nashoba responded, then turned to Sarah. My cousin says riders approach from the east, many men. Maxwell, Sarah said, fear rekindling in her chest. She looked down at Ezra's defeated form. He'll have brought more men, we can't fight them all. We won't need to, Nashoba replied, a grim smile touching his lips. Not anymore. The approaching riders crested the ridge within the hour, but they were not who Sarah expected. Instead of Maxwell Blackwood and his hired guns, a detachment of army cavalry appeared, led by a stern-faced captain. Among them rode a tribal elder, his braided hair adorned with eagle feathers. Captain Reynolds, Nashoba greeted the officer with wary respect. You received my message. The captain dismounted, eyeing the bound Ezra Blackwood with obvious distaste. Your runner found us at Fort Laramie. Given the nature of the accusations, I thought it prudent to investigate personally. He turned to Sarah. Mrs. Blackwood, I presume? Sarah nodded, clutching Grace protectively. I understand you have evidence regarding weapons fraud and possible murder charges against the Blackwood family. Sarah produced the journal pages from her clothing. My husband documented everything. The defective rifles, the sabotaged ammunition sold to the tribes, all of it. While the captain examined the evidence, the tribal elder approached Nashoba, speaking quietly in their shared language. The conversation appeared tense but not hostile. Maxwell Blackwood was arrested this morning, Captain Reynolds announced, closing the journal. It seems your evidence corroborates reports we've received from several forts regarding equipment failures. Ezra Blackwood will join his father to await trial. As the soldiers secured Ezra on horseback, Sarah approached the captain. What happens now? Justice, Mrs. Blackwood, slow but certain. He glanced at Nashoba, who stood apart with the Apache warriors. Your friend may have saved many lives by bringing this to light, both white and Indian. After the soldiers departed with their prisoner, Sarah found Nashoba deep in conversation with the elder. She waited respectfully until they finished, the elder clasping Nashoba's shoulder before joining the other warriors. Your people, Sarah said softly. They came for you. Nashoba nodded, watching as the Apache riders disappeared into the forest. My cousin never believed I betrayed our ways. He has been watching over me, waiting for me to find my path again. And have you found your path? Nashoba turned to her, his dark eyes softening as they fell on Grace. Perhaps, though it is not one I expected. 3 months later, Sarah stood on the porch of a newly constructed trading post at the crossroads between the white settlement and Apache territory. Grace, now crawling with determined energy, played at her feet while Nashoba negotiated with a group of settlers for furs and supplies. The Blackwoods had been convicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. Jacob's death had been ruled a murder, though insufficient evidence existed to charge Maxwell directly. The Blackwood Ranch had been seized by the government, with a portion awarded to Sarah as Jacob's widow. She had refused it all, wanting nothing from the family that had caused so much suffering. Instead, she and Nashoba had used the modest sum from selling her horse and remaining possessions to build the trading post, creating a place where settlers and tribal members could conduct fair business. Satisfied with your kingdom? Nashoba asked, joining her on the porch after the settlers departed. Sarah leaned against him, watching as the sun set over the mountains where they had found each other. It's no kingdom, just a beginning. Nashoba's arm circled her waist as Grace crawled toward them, babbling happily in a mixture of English and Apache words. Some beginnings are worth more than kingdoms. In the distance, a small group of riders approached, an Apache family bringing goods to trade. Behind them, a wagon of settlers followed cautiously. Two worlds approaching the crossroads where Sarah and Nashoba stood waiting, ready to bridge the divide with the love that had saved them both.